continue our Imagine an America podcast episode, Change Agents, Blueprints from the Frontline, with our guest, Dave Dennis Sr., a legacy of activism. Dave Dennis Sr.'s civil rights activism began as a college student leading sit-ins in Louisiana. He was a freedom rider and served as a co-director of COFO and as CORE's Mississippi Freedom Summer Project Director to help Mississippians register to vote. Mr. Dennis received a law degree, opened a law firm, and later worked with Bob Moses as the director of the Southern Initiative of the Algebra Project to provide quality education as the key to civil rights today. Mr. Dennis, it's an honor to have you here with us today.
To be here.
Your contributions to the movement are renowned, and we want to hear how that happened. How did you get involved in the movement, and how did the movement impact and shape your life's journey?
That's a heavy question. First of all, how I got involved in the movement, I have to first of all say has something to do with what I call fate. It was my destiny without my even knowing it. The example is I was born on a plantation in northern Louisiana, and I ended up going to high school in Baton Rouge, living in my aunt. One of my classmates that graduated with at that time was named Hubert Brown, better known as H. Rap Brown now, but at the same time he and I were very good friends, and we would doing the demonstrations, one led by his brother Ed Brown. We decided to go play basketball. So the interest in the civil rights movement, we had an interest, but get involved, And then I got a scholarship to Dillard Universities, and when I got there were students from Dillard, Xavier, and several other institutions with some of the lead people in this country. They had Rudy Lombard and a bunch of others from CORE were in jail for sitting in. I didn't want to have anything to do with involved in the civil rights movement there. So one day I was walking across campus about several months after being at Dillard, and there was a demonstration, rally rather, and it was being led by this young lady who was sitting there and she was talking. And I passed by and I saw her waving, and I kept going. I said, wait a minute, and I went back. I really went back to talk to her to try to get a date. And so after the meeting, we talked, and she ended up, to make a long story short, ended up having me go with her to a meeting, which was a civil rights meeting of CORE, where I met a lot of people in the civil rights movement, and from there it became mine, trying to get a date with her, and her getting me involved in the movement. That's how I first got involved.
Well, that really sounds like fate.
That was fate.
A date, basketball, and what we have later is a rich and wonderful life in which you contributed to the movement. Yeah. For our listeners, if you don't mind, I've even thrown out a couple acronyms. Could you tell our listeners what COFO stands for and then what CORE stands for?
COFO stands for Council of Federated Organizations. It was an organization that was begun back in 1961, actually to support the freedom rides, and it was started by some of the icons of Mississippi, Amzie Moore, Dr. Aaron Henry, Medgar Evers, Carsey Hall, which was one of the, and Jack Young, two of the only black lawyers you had in Mississippi at the time. And it was started in Clarksdale, Mississippi, and that was its purpose. And then after that, Bob Moses then, and the CORE had another person representing them there by the name of Tom Gaither, began to meet about how to pull the state together of black organizations to support voter registration drive there pieces. In the meantime, there was a program called the Voter Education Project out of Atlanta, Georgia. The Southern Region Council had gotten some funding to go and to put into helping to get blacks registered to vote in the state. And so it's hard to get that money in, and it fights between organizations, stuff like that. So the idea then became the discussion around how can we pull this together. So in the meantime, Tom was transferred out. I came into took Tom's place in April of 1962. Bob and I had met in 1961. I'm sorry, January 1962, and he had been talking to me what they were doing, and it sounded good to me, but that the next step, really, the real fight was getting into the politics of blacks. They had to deal with citizenship, and at the same time is economic development. And so we decided that I thought it was a good idea. And so we went to Clarksdale, I think it was in May or June of that same year, right after I arrived in Mississippi. And we actually put together a committee was set up to deal with voter registration and education in the state of Mississippi. And Bob and I became co-directors of that committee.
Sure.
So the history has it as if we started COFO, but that COFO was begun almost about a year earlier.
Sure. Well, and I appreciate you explaining those entities, because too often I believe people don't appreciate fully the organizational structure and how that played into the strategy for what you all were doing. Even if you didn't know what the outcome was, you had a strategy and you had a system that was unfolding, if you will, for the greater good. And I think our awareness and appreciation of that is really important. One of the things that you mentioned, several important figures in that space, including Bob Moses and your relationship with him. Could you elaborate on the work that you all did together?
Yeah, this is how fate plays a role in this quite a bit, is it? Because back up a little bit, many years just before Bob died, he and I were talking about, he always talked about the fact is that he got involved in the civil rights movement, and his first meeting with Ella Baker, and Ella Baker having him to travel around the South to meet black leaders. Most of them came from the NAACP, which I think is important here. So he asked Bob, I said, Bob, you always talk about going through Shreveport. Well, Shreveport was where I was raised, in Louisiana. I said, who was the person you met in Shreveport? So Bob says, he looks at me and says, I can't remember his name, but I think he was some kind of a doctor. And I said, would he be a dentist? He said, I think he's I said, he wouldn't be Dr. C.O. Simpkins, would he? And he said, that's him. Well, that's important is because Dr. C.O. Simpkins was also my mentor years before he met Bob Moses. All right. And so anyway, that was our first relationship without even knowing it, coming. So in 1962, I was working in Baton Rouge, and Southern University students had walked out, Southern, and involved in demonstrations, had been put in jail, arrested. And so at the meantime, Bob and a group of the SNCC people were working in Macomb, Mississippi. So when we got out of jail, which is in January, we had spent jail Christmas, New Year's, and part of January. We got out, Bob heard about this, so he came over with him and Chuck McDew and Dion Diamond and some other SNCC people came to Baton Rouge, where we was staying, as we had been kicked out of the place. And so he came in to recruit some of the students we had from Southern University. And so that was my first discussion, my first meeting with Bob, and he explained to me about the importance of our getting into the whole politics and stuff and what they were trying to do, what he had his idea about doing that beginning in Mississippi, that we had to begin to move, not away from, but begin to move into another area other than just sit-ins. It's more about not having the right to buy a hamburger, but owning the joint that sells the hamburger.
Yes.
Piece. In the meantime, there was a gentleman from CORE, elderly gentleman by the name of Jim McCain out of South Carolina, who was one of the organizers for CORE. And he was telling me the same thing.
Yes.
So I was beginning to think about, well, we got all these kids, we're sitting in, we're doing this stuff here, but what kind of progress we're really making?
Well, you said economic empowerment earlier, and this is that economic empowerment part. So we talk about it now. You all were talking about it 60 years ago.
Correct. And so that's where the whole Black Power piece had a lot to do with what we talk about. Black Power wasn't about violence, it was about economic, political power of the black people there. So the end rate is that that was the beginning. And so Bob came back again back around in February. We had another discussion. In the meantime, they were getting ready to move Tom Gator out, and so I decided I wanted to go to Mississippi to take on this whole piece, because I liked what they were doing, the work he was doing there. Now I have to be honest with you. At the time, I didn't tell Core the whole truth, because Tom's major role was still monitoring the Freedom Rides, because they were still continuing bringing people in. And so I was supposed to come in and I had no intention of getting involved that much in it. And to the extent is, when I got to Mississippi, the first thing I did was try to, one of the first people I met but decided to sneak people was Meg Evers. And I spent a lot of time there. We really taught me a lot about the ropes, what was going on in Mississippi, the whole politics and stuff. And so, so that was the beginning of my whole involvement there is with Bob and the rest of it, and my being and getting to know him better. And we just sort of hooked.
Yeah.
And so CORE, which is really called the Congress of Racial Equality, which really started the Freedom Rides. The first one being all the way back in 1943.
Right.
So it was not the one that we had. So
I think that's an important point, because that's almost 20 years prior to the how Freedom Rides are often described, and that you all sort of borrow from some of the lessons from what had happened in 1943?
Well, I think that the original with Jim Farm, and that's what they did, and some of the same people involved, like Jim Peck and those people, actually on the original Freedom Ride,
right.
Piece back there. For me, no. I didn't know much about that history. I ended up, as CORE, as you recall, CORE, the Freedom Ride began in D.C., it was supposed to end in New Orleans. So I was part of what they call the New Orleans CORE. And I just got out of jail, and so at the time they had the people beaten in Anniston, Alabama, Birmingham, and everything else. So here's where some of the things came up with, because the CORE got a bad rap here, is because they thought they had run from the sort of abandoned the Freedom Ride. That wasn't true at all. A lot of people very seriously injured on those two rides, the one that went into Birmingham and Anniston, Alabama. In fact, 4 people actually died as a result of the injuries they received, like Jim Peck and others, later on. But anyway, they had to get them, they couldn't find medical treatment for them in those areas. So they had to get them out of there and bring them to New Orleans. And we had problems having doctors even in New Orleans to take care of them. And so what happened there is there was a hospital there called Flint Goodrich Hospital, where blacks could practice medicine. They even couldn't do it in the general hospital at that time. And so Flint Goodrich was hooked up as a part of Dillard University. Sort of Dillard University had this medical connection school at that time. So that's how we were able to get them, why they brought them to New Orleans, because there were black doctors there to be able to treat them at a black hospital.
The depths of segregation were real.
Right. And so that's a part of the story that is not really told. And so at the meantime by the continuation of the rise, there were 2 dynamic black women. One is sort of forgotten in the history, and the one is not forgotten about. And one was Diane Nash, who did a beautiful job with the work she did in terms of Nashville, continuing to ride with John Lewis and others. But at the other end, in New Orleans, there was a lady by the name of Oretha Castle.
What was her first name again?
Oretha, O-R-E-T-H-A, Oretha Castle.
Yes.
And to make that connection about, not talking about faith when I get in the movement, the woman that I was chasing to get myself in the movement was her sister, which I did not know at the time. And at any rate, so they were on these 2 ends going, and so then the Oretha was insisting that we're going to have New Orleans CORE had to send some people to join the riders in a meeting in Montgomery, Alabama. And so I volunteered I didn't really volunteer. Doris volunteered me to be part of the group. So there were 5 of us that went to Montgomery. So this is where what hooked me into the movement, was this event here. Was when I get to Montgomery, there was the riot was going on. There was the time that the king and them were trapped in the church in Montgomery, and Shuttlesworth and all of them. And so the next day we all met. And so I go to this house. It was a home owned by Dr. Harris, who was a local pharmacist. And so we had a meeting. So in that meeting were icons of the civil rights movement that I've read about but never met. Martin Luther King was there, Shuttlesworth, you just name them, the rest of the piece of Diane Nash, James Bevel, a lot of the pictures on these walls here in this building here, in that room. And so I'm sitting there, I am really going through changes here, because here it is, my mom did not know I had been arrested already in New Orleans. And here they talk about going, and I was actually really scared, you know. And I was, I'm gonna miss my final exams at Dillard University. I'm gonna be kicked out of school. This is it. My chance to become an electrical engineer is out, you know. So what I'm gonna do, all the things I was dreaming not to be, and to be. And so somewhere in this room, you know, it sticks to me today when I talk about fate. While I'm having this decision-making pieces, somebody says in that room there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. And so I came up in the Baptist, you know, when my grandmother used to take me to these little tent revivals and stuff like this is, and so they used to say when the spirit hits you, it's gonna hit you, boom, you know. And it did one day when I was a little kid. And so when I was sitting there, what you call the spirit hit me. I can't explain it, what it was, what it is, but all of a sudden my hand was up, I volunteered. And so from that period, there's a difference to me between being afraid and what you call real fear that paralyzes you. It all went out the door. There's nothing mattered. You got to do this. And it's changed. So that change came. When I say faith, is these little things, pieces that put together, but they begin. I'm being drawn into this. And my grandmother used to tell me all the time, God put you here for some particular reason. Say, and when he finishes with you, he's going to let you go. But until then, you're going to keep you here, you know. And so I believe that in a large extent in terms of what I do and what I've been through. But in terms of the civil rights movement, when I look back, all the little pieces coming in. I mean, Bob Moses, Dr. Seal Simpkins, my classmate, H. Rap Brown, you know, people like that, even before I even decided to be, you know, into it. And so but the big thing about this moment in this piece is, for years I asked people, say, do you remember that person? You know, I've not found anybody today who told me they heard the same thing. That's a true story.
My goodness.
True story.
Well, and all of those pieces, they did come together, and you did some amazing work on behalf of this country. And you tell a story about that in this amazing book with your son. The movement made us. A father, a son, and the legacy of a freedom ride. Could you share how this piece of art came to be and what it means to you?
Well, it means a lot because number one is the work of my son, really. You know, I was able to tell the story. He did a lot of research, got a chance to talk to a lot of people. Some of it passed on since he started working on this book. And so from a small kid, he grew up around a lot of these people, you know, that they come to the house, we talk, we hear stories. And he always would tell him about the fact is, you know, Dad, I'm gonna write this story one of these days. That was before he even got out of high school. So he was doing this stuff. And so he stuck with me. He went to school, went to journalism, which I thought was a big mistake because they didn't make any money. And I'd say he's going to take care of it for the rest of my life. You know? But at any rate, it's the way he put it together. But what we tried to do was that the movement talks a lot about certain people, you know, the Bob Moses, Martin Luther Kings, the rest of them, himself, and some of the other people. But the movement, what really made the movement was the people. I mean, when we brought in 1,000 students to summer 90s, people talk about that. They don't talk about the people who fed them and housed them in the Mississippi. the thousands and hundreds of people, for at that time, it's not just in Mississippi, but in Alabama, Louisiana, and places like that, it was a death warrant for you to go out even to attempt to register to vote, you know. I mean, so those people to me is what it took to be, to the movement is on whose shoulders we stood, who actually fed us, who protected us, the steptoes. I mean, I look at these pictures here, I mean, it grabs me because I see people whom I know, how, whatever, whoever I am, to these particular people on this wall.
Yes.
And so one of the things that really takes me, I guess, sticks with me, because these faces you see, I mean, they don't go away. You know, we lost a whole lot of people during the movement. You know, it wasn't just Cheney, Goodman, Swerve, Medgar Evers, but a lot of those people, you see them. I mean, I was with Medgar 1 hour before he died. Mm. I remember what he said. I remember what he looked like. I was with Cheney, Goodman, Swerve, you know, 24 hours before they died. I remember what they looked like. I know what we talked about and stuff like that. And you name them, people down the line that we had. There would not have been a freedom summer had not been for Lewis Allen. We were trying to make a decision whether or not we were going to do freedom summer, bring these 1,000 kids down. It was in January of 1964. And Bob Moses got a call this, and it went down because he went to, and it was Lewis Allen who had been killed. When he came back to the meeting, we were debating, and he said, Lewis Allen died too. We were dying. There was no question about that time, we got to do this no matter what happens, basically. So I think that what we were trying to do with the book is to bring to life attention to all of these particular people and the role they played. CORE did not make me, you know. The people in CORE helped make me, you know. Yeah. And so, and I think that the civil rights organizations were important in what they did, but it was the people, you know. Sure. And so what we forget about happens to be all of those thousands of people who really made contributions. You know, and my son says all the time, like, if you were born black in this country, which you, you know, you made some contribution to the movement pieces. And so I remember a lot of times we didn't have, we got paid like $25 a week. You know, it was the money we were able to get. Out of that money, we had to pay transportation, room and board, you know, whatever else you had. Yeah. That's all you got. You know, it wasn't like you put in your pocket pieces. So a lot of times we were hungry. I mean, if you look at the pictures of the civil rights workers, you didn't see any fat civil rights workers on it. We were all skinny, you know. So we used to go knock on doors at the time around dinner time because we knew people were going to be, you know, you're going to find somebody got fried chicken and whatever that is. And they're going to invite you in. They invite you in, y'all come. And so one of the things that really happens here that's very important, I think, that about the movement and what this is all about, what we were trying to bring out here, it had to do with family, you know. And so the civil rights movement, these kids who came down, they were brought into the homes because they were like the children. So people accepted us as we were students, part of that extended family that I grew up with. So when I grew up, I came in a home with a single parent, you know, and didn't have a group raised primarily by my grandparents and stuff. But I remember, even on the farm, and then when we moved to the city at Shreveport, I had a lot of fathers. Mr. Jack had the right to jack me up because the fact is that my grandparents gave him permission. We were children of the community. Yes. And that was a family structure we were protected. I don't remember children going hungry. I remember adults being hungry, you know. So we always told you, it's always, hey, Sonny, how you doing? You know, I knew you did well in school, or you did bad in school. Because during that time, it was our doctors, our lawyers, our teachers lived in the same community. So we knew each other. But to give an example about that is that the family structure pieces, it was so important that in 1964, after we did the demonstration stuff we had is in Freedom Summer we had and our challenge to the Democratic Party, and we really went up against the power structure at that time is, what came back was they understood, the other team side understood what was going on here is the family structure, this thing they had, we could get a mass march overnight. Yep. You know, this tightness of the community. They went after it. The first big piece was, what went after it is, we heard, was that it was to blame us, black people, and not having a proper family structure, you know, fathers, absentee fathers, and all this stuff like this was the problem, and not just racism. So they're blaming us for the problem. So what you had there is, so how they attacked that on the national level was the Moynihan report. It was the big attack on the black family piece.
Daniel Moynihan.
Right, and so then you had to deal with how you deal with the rest of the piece. So you had like the poverty programs, you drain off the black leadership. It looked good on paper, but the black leadership, was drained off from the black community. Black businesses began to fold because we went to the Piggly Wiggly, places like that is, grocery stores is, and then go to the store because they could get that stuff cheaper,
right,
and sell it cheaper than the man we had. But we used to have our own grocery stores and stuff like it. So they went after the family structure, the economic structure, and then the whole culture aspect of it came with the whole piece around urban renewal.
Right.
Where you brought the expressways right through the whole economic development.
Right in the middle of neighborhoods.
Exactly right. So the attack on us has been a long time. Make America Great Again has been around for a long time. It's not something new in this country. So the whole family piece is what we need to figure out is figure out how to get back to that is and say, and change the narrative.
Yeah.
So that's what happened to us is we let the other side. So what's going on here with the museum and what you're doing and other people here is fantastic. I mean, because without this, we sort of lost. We need this because our people need to understand what really happened and what is going on is and what impact what happened in the past is having now.
Well, we appreciate your contributions and your. We're honored that you're here. I mean, what we try to do is educate. We honor the legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we educate. And we seek to serve as a catalyst for positive social change. And we do that through facts and data and the opportunity to talk to people like yourself who were there, who were inspirational and influential in our society. And we're grateful for you, Mr. Dennis. Thank you, sir. We're honored here at the National Civil Rights Museum.
It's my pleasure.
We encourage you to subscribe to the museum's Imagine in America podcast series wherever you listen to podcasts. Send us your comments and share these episodes on social media. For more information, visit imagineinamerica.org. Today's episode is brought to you by the National Civil Rights Museum, located at the Lorraine Motel, the assassination site of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. It chronicles key episodes of the American Civil Rights Movement, examines today's global civil and human rights issues, provokes thoughtful debate, and serves as a catalyst for positive social change.